The entirely merciful, the especially merciful. Peace, mercy, and blessings of Allah the Almighty be upon all of you. I am Umar bin Abid, and you're watching Umar Linguistics. So, this video is in English, and the same video you can watch in Urdu as well. I have given the link in the description below. So, because this channel is bilingual, so I make each video both in English as well as in Urdu. So, this is our third lecture of phonetics. So actually we are following mainly this book, A Course in Phonetics by Peter Lectvogt. So I recommend you to download this book and read this book, and then if you don't understand a topic, so you can watch my lecture. So it's totally your choice. But I'll discuss few other things as well from other books as well if I feel that something is a little bit difficult to understand. But overall, this book is actually by one of the great phonetician, Peter Ledvogt late. So let's start today lecture. So today actually we are going to discuss the speech organs through which we produce sounds. So our vocal tract have different parts, and those parts through which we produce some sounds, these are called articulators. And we can divide these articulators in vocal tract into two major parts or into two major surfaces. So first of all, the principal parts of the upper surface of the vocal tract. So in other words, we can divide vocal tract articulators into upper surface of the vocal tract and the lower surface of the vocal tract. So actually the lower surface of the vocal tract is more mobile, that it can move more freely. For example, our lower teeth, whole lower jaw, and other parts as well. Our tongue. So these are more mobile parts as compared to the other. So before this, just pronounce this word capital. And while pronouncing capital, just imagine the parts of your parts of your vocal tract which are moving. So while saying capital for the first sound, you will see that your tongue will rise to the upper part of the mouth, and then to producing a sound, your tongue will be a little bit, when you say a, so you will notice that your tongue will be a little bit comes a little bit lower, and then you will pronounce this th sound and your lips will come together. Then you will pronounce another vowel, and then you pronounce this sound th, when your tongue will touch uh, your tongue or your tongue tip will touch just behind the upper teeth, and then once again you will pronounce this l sound at the same position at which you will pronounce l sound. So actually the purpose of phonetics is that you understand every part of your speech. So you will become used to imagine this, that whenever you are speaking, so you are imagining where are your articulators moving, where your tongue is touching, where your tongue is resting, or when your tongue is moving upward and downward while pronouncing some vowels. So this is the purpose of phonetics. So when you will try this, so after some times you will be used to it, and it will just a process of it will be just a process for automation for you, that you automatically you will recognize these sounds and these movements. So first of all, we are going to discuss the upper surface of the vocal tract. So it's not a very difficult diagram. So upper part, so for first of all we have this upper lip, then we have our teeth, and combinedly the upper teeth, upper four teeth and the lower four teeth, are called incisors. INCISORS. Then behind the teeth we have this alveolar. So alveolar ridge here, just behind the upper teeth. So you can say it's uh, a protuberance or a bulge just behind the upper teeth, and you can feel it with your tongue or your tongue tip. Then just behind this alveolar ridge we have hard palate. If you just touch the tongue before the alveolar ridge, so you will find this hard palatal or hard palate, and thus behind it we have the soft palate or soft palate, also called velum. So most of the people cannot touch this part with their tongue. So this is the velum, and this is the velum, and here you can see it is the nasal cavity. Actually just behind, just upper this part of the vocal tract, we have nasal cavity, nose. And sometimes or when we produce sounds in which we are exhaling speech from our mouth, so at that time the velum is raised. Velum is raised, or in other words, velum is raised against this wall, and this wall is actually the wall of the pharynx. So velum is actually raised against this wall, and it is here it becomes a velic closure. So we call it velic closure, because there is a closure when velum is touched or raised against the wall of the pharynx. So there is a closure, and now our air is passing through our mouth. But velum sometimes can be lowered, and when velum is lowered, so there is a space, we have some space here, and the at that time the air is passing through nasal cavity, and this happens when we produce some sounds which we call nasals. For example, if I say, just if you say hmm hmm, or you pronounce sound like at the end of morning, so you will notice that you are actually exhaling your air through your nose. At that time velum is lowered. Just behind the velum we have this part which we called uvula. Uvula is actually an appendage or a small flap, and it can be seen when you open your mouth, just like hanging here, uvula. And just here is uvula, and just come down we have the wall of the pharynx. So this wall of the pharynx or upper part of the pharynx wall can also be included in the upper surface of the vocal tract. Then just show you another picture. So this is, as we know, it is uvula and it is pharynx, and this is our larynx also called voice box. And here we have these vocal folds which we have already discussed in the, I think, first or second lecture. So the part between uvula and between larynx, so this whole part and the area between uvula and this larynx is actually called pharynx. All right, and here we also have epiglottis. So epiglottis we'll discuss in lower surface of the vocal tract. So I'll show you another picture. So this is the lower surface of the vocal tract. So here we mainly have tongue. So tongue, and this is the lower lip, and we divide tongue into different parts. So first of all we have tip of the tongue. This just here, this is the tip of the tongue, and only this surface is called the blade of the tongue. And then we have the front of the tongue, center of the tongue, back of the tongue, and here it is complete. From here to here it is the root of the tongue. So actually epiglottis is attached to the root of the tongue. So if we look at then the blade of the tongue is just underneath the hard palate, because here we have started hard palate has been started here actually. So a small part of the blade is just behind underneath the hard palate, and the other part of the blade actually usually also touches to alveolar sometimes. Then if we talk about the front part of the palate, it is totally underneath underneath the hard palatal. When we talk about the center of the tongue, so center of the tongue is partly because here uh, soft palate also has been started. So the center of the tongue is partly underneath the hard palatal and partly underneath the soft palate. Then we have the back of the tongue, which is totally uh, underneath the soft palatal, and this is the root of the tongue, and this is the epiglottis. So let me show you now what is epiglottis and what is its function here. This is another picture where you can see the part of the tongue easily, or the lower part of the vocal surface clearly: tip, blade, front, center, back, and root. So this whole area comprises the root. So actually this is epiglottis. So you can see, and it is attached to the root of the tongue. So epiglottis has a main function. When we eat, when we swallow food, so here this part here we have trachea, trachea or esophagus. So from here we swallow our food, and during swallowing the food, epiglottis act as a cap. So it touches here, or it raises against the here glottal. uh, it touches here, and it will close the our larynx. So when our larynx is closed, so the food passes easily. Otherwise, if sometimes if you will try to speak during swallowing the food, so there is chances that your food will come into your larynx or into your trachea, and it can cause serious damage to you. Sometimes people may die because when the food is stuck here, so we are unable to speak, or even we are unable to breathe sometimes. So this is the main function of the epiglottis. So these were the upper surfaces and the lower surfaces of the vocal tract, and these were the parts we have discussed. In the upper surface: upper lip, teeth, alveolar ridge, hard palate, soft palate, uvula, pharynx wall. And lower surface we discussed lower lip, tip, tip of the tongue, blade, center, partly beneath hard palate and then partly beneath soft palatal, then back, beneath soft palatal, and then root, opposite the back wall of the pharynx, and the epiglottis, which is attached to the lower part of the tongue. So if you have some confusion that you cannot remember these terms, so this book accompanies a website by the same name, a course in phonetics, and here we can there we can solve some exercise to remember these part of the tongue. So let's have a look at this website. So this is the website, a course in phonetics. So here you can see 1 2 3 4, these are all chapters. So if I click on this one, and here if I click on this homework exercises, and here you can say fill in the names of vocal organs online. So just click on it. So here you have the picture, and there are some numbers, and this is we have to fill in the blank. So here it is written that fill in blank number 9. So what is blank number 9? Just look. So it is blank number 9. So it is the 9. So because it is the lower surface of the vocal tract and it is the tongue, so 9 will be the tip of the tongue. So I am writing tip, just tip. So the answer was, actually, I don't know why it has Yes, tip. So it has been corrected. Now 11 number is actually will be the, so it is the tip of the tongue, it is the blade of the tongue, and it will be the front part of the tongue, 11. So I am writing here front, and you will see, so it is correct. So in this way you can solve this exercise to recall all these terms, and it will be interactive for you as well. So with this picture you can also remember these terms, but these two pictures I think are more appropriate, because these pictures have divided vocal tract into two surfaces. So just to recall these terms, just to say these words and keep in mind these terms, like peculiar. So you will notice in peculiar, first your lips will come together, upper and lower lip will meet together, peculiar, and then your tongue will be a little bit back to produce this sound. And then your back and center of the tongue will be raised, so to produce the sound k. And you will notice that your tongue will touch a little bit to palate and soft palate while producing k sound. And then for l sound, your tongue will touch the most of the times to alveolar ridge, and in this way. Similarly, if you notice the difference between t and true, but you will notice, although in both these words th sound is actually at the beginning, but you will notice that in t, most probably you are touching your tip of the tongue to your alveolar ridge, but in true, your tongue will be a little bit, in other words, slightly farther ahead, because in true, due to the influence of r, we pronounce th sound a little bit farther. Then we have sigh and shy. So you will notice that in this word sigh, you will have a deep hollow in your tongue. Sigh. So if you just put your finger on your tongue, so you will feel a deep hollow. Then feel and thief, feel thief, feel thief. So what we have discussed about these diagrams, so actually these were two-dimensional diagrams. So but on the other hand, we know that the vocal tract is a tube shaped. So actually sometimes this type of diagrams are insufficient to conceptualize all the parts of the vocal tract. For example, positions of the sides of the tongue are invisible in these diagrams. And as we have discussed that while saying sigh, there is a deep hollow in the center of your tongue that is not present when we say shy. So but we cannot see this in two-dimensional diagram or mid-sagittal view, mid-sagittal view, mid-sagittal view. And what is mid-sagittal view? So actually this word is usually used in anatomy. So when we divide the part of any of part of the body into two sections, so the one section is called mid-sagittal view. And because we usually look it at on the page, so therefore we call it mid-sagittal view. But this mid-sagittal view is what we mostly look in almost all the books, because in books it is actually difficult to have a three-dimensional diagram. However, this simplified view or this mid-sagittal view cannot become the sole basis of our conceptualization of speech sounds. So we are going to look at some other aspects with which we can conceptualize more about these positions of upper surface and lower surface of the vocal tract which they take. So for this we have one more criteria, places of articulation. So as we know, while producing consonants, the stream of the air, somehow obstructed in some way or the other. Whenever we pronounce consonants, so there is obstruction of the air in our vocal tract in some way. And so consonant can be classified according to their place and manner of articulation. So in this lecture we are focusing on place of articulation or place of our obstruction, and in the next lecture we will look at manner of articulation or manner of obstruction. Manner of obstruction mean in which manner the air is obstructed in our vocal tract, and place of obstruction mean that where at which places the obstruction occurs. So the primary articulators that can cause obstruction in most of the world languages, these are our lips, tongue tip, blade, and back of the tongue. So we have one major classification of articulation. For example, speech gestures or speech sounds in which we use our lips, these are called labial articulations. On the other hand, those speech gestures or those speech sounds in which we use tip or blade of the tongue, these are actually called coronal articulations. And those speech gestures or speech sounds in which we use back of the tongue, these are called dorsal articulation. So for example, if we say the word this topic and we define it, we describe it with these type of articulation. So first of all we say that this th, because in th the tip or blade of the tongue has been used, so this first sound is a coronal articulation, or this sound has been pronounced from a coronal articulator. Then we have a vowel, then we have another consonant p. So p, in p we our lips come together, upper and lower lips, so we'll say it is a labial articulator. Labial articulator has pronounced this sound. Then we have this k sound. Actually it comes to the dorsal articulation, because in k sound, which is coming at the end of this word, it is pronounced with back of the tongue. However, this sole only this major classification actually is not sufficient to explain other places of articulations as well, because in coronal articulations we have many complexities, or we have many possibilities in coronal articulations. So therefore we have to classify these major classification into more you can say into more minute way. So therefore I am going to show you a picture as well first of all, and then we look at these places of articulation in English especially. So here you can see that it is a sagittal section of vocal tract showing the places of articulation that occur in English. So here, as we have talked about that the coronal region has many possibilities of producing sound. So here you can see first of all bilabial, labiodental, which we are going to discuss. So in coronal part, which is this part is called coronal part, or these are the coronal articulators. But here you can see there we have many possibilities. Sometimes the tip will touch tip or blade of the tongue will touch the alveolar ridge here. Sometimes tip or the blade of the tongue will touch here, sometimes here, and sometimes here. So we have actually 4 to 5 possibilities in coronal articulators. Similar is the case with other articulators as well, but coronal articulators have many possibilities. So now let's discuss all these aspects: bilabial, labiodental, palatal, velar, coronal. So the principal terms for particular types of obstruction required in the description of English are as follows. Why we are saying only English? Because in other languages we may have some other places as well. So in English we have bilabial, labiodental, dental, alveolar, retroflex, post-alveolar, palatal, and velar. So if we discuss bilabial, so as the name suggests, bi mean two and labial mean lip. So lower lip raises to touch the upper lip. So lower lip raises to touch the upper lip, like p, b. And when we say bat, tab, pat, tap, so we have this sound b, and these are all bilabial. Then we have labiodental. As the name suggests, so what happens that the lower lip raises to touch the upper teeth. For example, when we say fat, wat, so this lower lip will raises to touch the upper teeth. Then we have dental sounds. So in dental sounds, the tongue tip or blade and upper front teeth, so these are the main parts. So actually in dental sound we have two possibilities. So if we talk about the word, like if we pronounce word like thy and this thigh, so in Midwest and West Coast, or in America, so in American English, in Midwest and West Coast, so actually people are pronouncing dental sounds while protruding the tongue tip between the upper and lower teeth. So actually they pronounce dental sounds in the way that tongue tip will come between the upper and lower teeth, so sigh and thigh. On the other hand, the second possibility is that which is usually and that is produced by usually British English speakers. So actually what they do, that they touch the tip of the tongue to the upper part, behind the upper teeth, so they pronounce dental sounds in this way. So these are the two possibilities of dental sounds, or pronouncing the dental sounds, but both are common in English. Then we have the alveolar sound. So when we pronounce words like thigh, die, nigh, sigh, zeal, lie, so actually we are using the tip of the tongue or blade of the tongue. So for example, if we touch the tip of the tongue here at the alveolar ridge, even in this way we can say tip. And even if we touch the blade of the tongue at the alveolar ridge, even then we can say these words: thigh, die, nigh, sigh, zeal, lie, using the tip of the tongue or blade of the tongue. And again, there are two possibilities in pronouncing the alveolar sounds, and some people use the tip of the tongue and some people use the blade of the tongue. So this t, d, n, s, z, l, these are all alveolar actually. In incoming lectures we'll also look at the diagram of consonant chart as well. So there is another possibility in alveolar sounds. So sometimes many people pronounce, or some people pronounce this sound, and they tuck the tip of the tongue behind the lower teeth. So they touch the lower teeth with the tip of the tongue, and then it creates a closure, because when tongue will touch here, so here will be a closure at the alveolar ridge as well, and the sound will passes in this way when the tongue will touch here. So they pronounce the sounds in this way: sigh. So if you can do this, so just pronounce sigh by first of all touching the tip of the tongue to the lower teeth. Sigh. So you will notice that the air will push towards in this way. And we can also distinguish between alveolar and dental sounds by using these words: ten and tense. So when you will say ten and when you will say tense, so you will notice for most of the people, when they pronounce ten, so this sound will be at the alveolar ridge, the tip of the tongue or the blade of the tongue will touch the alveolar ridge when they say 10, yani when they say n in 10. But when they say tense, in this they will notice that the n sound is further uh, forward actually a little bit forward, and they will notice that in tense they are pronouncing n sound behind touching the tip of the tongue or blade of the tongue behind the upper teeth. Then we have retroflex sounds. What are retroflex? In other words, when the tip is raised and curled back toward the interior portion of the palate. So what will happen, that this tip or blade of the tongue will curl in this way, and they will touch here at the palate behind the alveolar ridge. The tip of the tongue is actually curled. So many English speakers do not use retroflex sounds at all, but in many speakers do this who actually have a different first language as compared to English, who have first language not English but other languages in which retroflex sounds occur. So they can pronounce like rai. So if I say like rai and ro, rai, ro, re, while touching the R here, while touching the tip of the tongue here. But if I curl this back toward here, and if I pronounce it at the retroflex and I curl my tongue back toward the palate, so you will notice that it will pronounce like rai, ro, ray. And sometimes some people also pronounce retroflex at the end of word like ire, over, or ver. One way is to say ire, over, but sometimes when we pronounce it as a retroflex, so we'll say ire, over. So these are retroflex. So now we have post alveolar. So in post alveolar we use tongue blade and back of the alveolar ridge. So what we will use, tongue blade and back of the alveolar ridge just here. So when you say a word like shy, she, and show, so actually your position is actually post alveolar. So but during these consonants the tip of your tongue may be down or maybe a little bit lower. So for example, your tongue may touch to lower front teeth or up near the alveolar ridge, but in each case the blade of your tongue, in other words this part of the tongue, this blade of the tongue, so your tip may go towards the lower teeth or may go towards the upper teeth when you pronounce a sound like shy and she and show. So you can notice that you can pronounce these sounds by raising the tip of the tongue to behind the upper teeth or behind the lower teeth, but in each case the blade of the tongue will be close to back part of the alveolar ridge. In each case this blade will remain here. Either you are moving your tip towards the lower part of the teeth, or either you are moving your tip towards the upper part of the teeth. In both cases the blade will remain at the back of the alveolar ridge. So because these sounds are made at the boundary between the alveolar ridge and the hard palate, so actually when we pronounce these sounds, alveolar sounds, so this blade of the tongue is partly at the at this position at post alveolar, at partly and at the palatal. So at this part usually our tongue will remain here. Just to show you, yes, at this part. So at this part, so you know this part is partly post alveolar or behind the alveolar ridge, and the partly at the palatal position. So during these alveolar sounds are most of the time our tongue will remain partly here. A blade of the tongue will partly remain at the palatal and partly remain behind the alveolar ridge. So therefore these sounds are also called palato-alveolar, that they are their position is palate as well as alveolar. And we can also pronounce a post alveolar sound with tip or blade of the tongue, tongue blade and back of the alveolus. So yes, we can also pronounce this sound with tip or blade of the tongue, but usually, as we know, that the tongue blade and back of the alveolar are the main parts. So we can pronounce it either with tip or blade of the tongue. For example, if we say ship shape, and you will notice that sometimes uh, your tip of the tongue will come down as well as upward, but you can pronounce it with tip as well, tip or blade of the tongue, ship shape. Then we have palatal sounds. So it means that the front of the tongue, this part of the tongue, sorry, which means that front part of the tongue will touches at the palatal position. So for example, when we say the word you, actually you, so actually the first consonant y is at this position. Our front part of the tongue is touches the palatal here. So if you say y very slowly, so you can isolate the consonant at the beginning, so you can notice this. And if you keep your tongue in this position y, and then breathe in, while breathe in by mouth, not by nose. So y, and at this position just breathe in by your mouth, so you will feel a cool air passing between the front and the palatal of your mouth. So these are palatal sounds, or in other words, this is the position of a palatal, and in this way the air is obstructed. Then we have velar, and velar is this, or in other words, it is the soft palate. This position is the soft palate. So back of the tongue and soft palate are used. So this part of the tongue and this part will be touched here. So the consonant that have farther back articulation in English, and these are actually velar sounds, and these actually occur in like hack, hang, hang, the last sounds of these words. And in all these sounds, the back of the tongue is raised so that it touches the velum. So combinedly, we can say that bilabial and labiodental, they can be classified as labial, which we study in major classification, because at least the lower lip are involved, lower lip, and sometimes the both lips are involved. Then the next for dental, alveolar, retroflex, and palato-alveolar or post-alveolar. These fall in coronal articulations. Why? Because in coronal articulations, the tip or blade of the tongue is raised in some way, and the tip or blade of the tongue are involved in coronal articulations. And we can include the velar in dorsal articulations, articulation, because in dorsal articulation we use the back of the tongue. So what we discussed, the major classification, we can combine, or we can put this you can say this detailed classification into major classification in this way. So I just have an exercise for you to feel the different places of articulation. If we say fee, seem, see, and she, first of all, just imagine that whether these sound the consonants are voiced or voiceless in these sounds. So actually all consonants are voiceless in these sounds, but you will notice interestingly that in fee, your in all these words, your articulators will will move from labiodental to dental, alveolar, and to palato-alveolar. For example, in labiodental, fee, your upper teeth are touching your lower lip. Then dental sounds, because seam is pronouncing when your tongue is protruding between upper and lower teeth, or just touching behind the upper teeth. In C, you are pronouncing this alveolar because your tongue tip or your tongue blade is touching at the alveolar ridge. And then she is palato-alveolar because your front part of the tongue, uh, or your in other sometimes your blade of the tongue is touching at the palate and at the alveolar as well. So this is all about today's lecture, and these are the two references which I have used for this video. So inshallah the next lecture will be the oro nasal process. So I hope you had understood it. Don't forget to give your feedback. Remember in your prayers. Jazakallah khairan and thank you.